Chris and Chris talk movies.
Hello, I hit the mic. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, this is my co-host.
My name is Chris Huddleston.
And today we are both very excited to be talking to you about Guillermo del Toro's Oscar-winning film, The Shape of Water. Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do. So The Shape of Water was a 2017 film directed by Guillermo del Toro. And the synopsis is such. Elisa is a mute, isolated woman who works as a cleaning lady in a hidden high-security government laboratory in 1962 Baltimore. I don't know if I realized it was Baltimore or not. Her life changes forever when she discovers the lab's classified secret and mysterious scaled creature from South America that lives in a water tank. As Elisa develops a unique bond with her new friend, she soon learns that its fate and very survival lies in the hands of a hostile government agent and a marine biologist. And it stars Sally Hawkins, Michael Shannon, Richard Jenkins, Octavia Spencer, Doug Jones, and some other people. All right. So I had seen this before you. This was a first time watch for you.
That's correct.
Yes. So what did you think?
I loved it. And it's interesting because I've had conversations with other people since who just couldn't get into the concept of it. Like the very one of them was like, oh, is that one about the woman who has an affair with the fish? And I was like, that'll be it.
I've heard other people say the same. Yeah.
That'll be the one.
Get past that.
And they're like, that's not. But from the minute it started, it had its hook in me, so to speak. See what I did there?
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's beautifully shot and it's lush and it feels it's very poetic and human. Del Toro it won the Best Picture for that year, right? So it's, however you feel about the Academy and how they pick Best Picture, it's not usually given to just stinkers, whether or not you think that was the one that should have won, it resonates in many ways with people on that. I think a running theme of Del Toro's movies have to do with the monster and who or what is the monster. And sometimes there are literal monsters in the movies, and frequently there's a character, a human character, that is really the scariest monster of the film. And Michael Shannon in this stole this movie. And it's great performances all across the board. But he really ran away with it, in my opinion, because he is absolutely terrifying in this. He's a favorite of mine. I love Michael Shannon in almost everything I see him in. But this is just a spectacular performance. Yeah, I love that it's a period piece. I love that it's set when it's set 50s, right? Early 50s.
62, I think is what it says.
62, 60s.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. The actor who is the fish man.
Yeah, that's Doug Jones.
Doug Jones does a lot of that stuff and does it very well. Like wears a lot of prosthetics. In his career.
Del Toro comes back to him often because I don't know if you know what Doug Jones looks like outside of the makeup, but he was
wearing makeup.
He's a really thin guy, and he was and you had brought this up before we watched the movie. I think that you wondered if it was the same character from Hellboy, because there's a fish guy in that too, and Doug Jones plays him. He's also have you seen Pan's Labyrinth?
Yes.
He's the creature with that's Doug Jones as well. So yeah, he works with him.
Is he the actor in, have you seen Star Trek Discovery at all?
No.
I bet that's also Doug Jones. There's a prominent character who is he's tall and thin and is also covered with prosthetic stuff.
Okay.
I bet that's also Doug Jones. I didn't become aware of that guy as an actor until Discovery.
Okay.
And then I see him everywhere. And now that I've watched like a series of episodes with this guy in it, and I see something like this, or I see Hellboy, and I'm like, oh, I bet that's the same guy. I don't know for sure that it is, but I'd be surprised if it isn't. He's great.
Mm-hmm.
And our ingenue, our female star, is mute, so she has a silent performance. No easy lift, and really carries it off. I mean, everybody, fantastic performances, gorgeous cinematography. I think that the shame in my mind of like my other friend who couldn't get past that kind of conceit, isn't that a woman who has a love affair with a fish, is that, and I think this is a central point of the movie, is that of course you look at him and you see a fish, he's a monster, but what their feelings for each other are the most intensely human things in the film. And that's precisely the point. So to let it stop you there is in some ways to hit the wall the movie attempts, and I think succeeds in breaking down. Of course, it doesn't succeed if you don't watch it.
Yeah, exactly.
But just gorgeous stuff. So I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
So I saw this in the theater when it was originally released and loved it, and I had not been back to it since. It was just a movie that I had fond memories of it, but watching it again, and I started watching it and it was like, I was thinking, oh, I remember all this stuff. This is what happens. And I almost had the temptation to kind of fast forward since I'd seen it before. And then, as you said, it gets its hooks in you. And it's just a beautiful movie. I mean, and like you were saying, you take this, it's in real life, it would be preposterous to think that, okay, this woman falls in love with this creature who bites the head off of a cat at one point, because it doesn't know any better. But I think that is the skill of someone like Del Toro. Like, I was thinking there's a scene very late in the film where she is in love with the creature, but it's very difficult and she can't really express to him because he doesn't speak English. He doesn't. And she signs to him as she signs to everyone. But she can't really express to him that at this point in the film, she can't express her feelings for him exactly. And there's a part where they're sitting at, like, there's one part where she buys him a card, like a greeting card that says, I appreciate you as a friend or whatever. And, the thing is looking at it and it's like, he points at it, and it's like, does he understand? He can't read, so does he understand this? But so they're sitting at her table in her apartment that she lives in, and it's eating eggs, and she's signing and she's trying to tell him how much she loves him, and he's just eating his eggs. And it turns into a dance number where, it goes to black and white, and she's dancing with the creature, and they do this dance routine. And I was just thinking, on the page with a less skilled director, this could just be laughable. You could just be like, this is ridiculous.
Right.
But it's beautiful in the film. And so, and as we always do with these movies, everything on the podcast, we are going to spoil this because I think we have to talk about the ending. So if you have not seen this, just watch it. It's just a beautiful film. Everything about it.
Agreed.
But so ultimately they wind up together at the end, and it's just, that last, I mean, just the whole movie is great, but that last 15 or 20 minutes where they're going to be united essentially is just beautiful, know. And at that point, they're able to communicate. I don't really know where I'm going with all this, but it's just, it's a fantasy movie.
Mm.
And that's one thing that
Fairy tale was
a fairy tale. Yeah,
was
exactly.
the word that the term that leapt to my mind. Oh, this is a fairy tale.
And you have Richard Jenkins as the narrator, and Del Toro has come back to him. I don't know how many movies of Del Toro's that he's been in, but he was in Nightmare Alley too. And man, how great that guy is. He has a pretty small part in it, but he narrates it, as this fairy tale. He just has such a great voice,
Yeah.
I just love that guy. I mean, everybody in this is fantastic. But I remember at the year that this was released, to me, this was definitely an Academy Award Best Picture worthy film. But it's interesting in terms of the Academy, because there aren't a lot of fantasy, sci-fi, horror-ish films that, you know what I mean, that win Best Picture. So I thought, as great as this film is, it was a really interesting, it was a little outside of the box for what the Academy would typically go after. I think,
I agree. And I sort of wish that I had taken the opportunity to read criticism and articles of this film, because there's a lot going on in it. I think there's a lot of typical fairy tale material going on in it, because we're coming in age and discovering of love and exploration of self and identity. But so Richard Jenkins is her roommate, I suppose. They live above a movie theater, one of those big old grand single screen movie theaters.
Well, they live across the hall from each other. Yeah,
across the hall from each other, but they both live above the theater. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it sort of weaves into their collective fantasies of the kind of golden they watch on television. They watch these sort of black and white Fred Astaire numbers, and there are big, I think there's a Ben-Hur like epic playing down below at one point. And so the film kind of references this other media of the time, these other sort of depictions of fantasy life at the time. And, Del Toro, and this is just kind of stream of consciousness, but he also was, at least you had told me that he was partially or working on a Creature from the Black Lagoon concept, so he's got, which is, of course, a monster. I don't know precisely when that film was made, but it's more of that era than ours, the
right
swamp monster. At the end, there's a sort of a thing that the Aztecs or wherever they found this guy revered him as a god, and he seems to sort of be able to heal himself. So there's that trope kind of runs through Del Toro movies too, that some of these monsters are gods, whether they're good gods or evil gods, or just, that humanity categorizes a literal monster in a variety of ways, right? And doesn't. You've got a character like, I can't remember the guy's name. Do you remember the character's name Michael Shannon plays, the agent?
I'll look it up here real quick.
Well, anyway, but you've got a character like that walking around who is
Richard Strickland.
Strickland is absolutely monstrous, and very, very of his time. Like, that's the other thing I love about this being a period piece is he goes and he buys, everything's a symbol. He goes and he buys a fancy Cadillac, and the salesman gives him this perfect period pitch, and he ends up driving out of there in that car, this aqua or teal. Cadillac. What was the color though? There's
teal, I think it was, because he
says green. He's like, no, it's teal. Yeah. And then of course the car gets smashed up in the escape, and so everything is a metaphor for something else. But sexuality is another thing in this movie that I think is dealt with in very frank and human ways. The Richard Jenkins character has sort of a crush on a guy that works at a pie shop and misinterprets his friendliness and goes in and sort of puts his hand on the other guy's hand, and there's a really uncomfortable, and I thought frightening moment where we realize that the other guy isn't into it and is homophobic in a hostile way. And it doesn't come to violence, but I really thought it might have, and in that moment. And the whole thing, the whole movie is set in this gorgeous, glittering world that contains genuinely wonderful things, but is also in many places just skin deep.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, the car, I'm not nothing negative to Cadillacs, but the car is really comes to be about this sales pitch that the the salesman paints for him. And the other side of the coin is also true, because Strickland, who is a real nasty piece of work, has, you know, 2 kids and a wife and a little 1962 house, right, in his teal Cadillac, and it all looks like it would on TV. Everything looks like his wife has this kind of Betty Draper like bouffant haircut, and the poofed skirt. I forget what you call the stuff that makes the skirt poof out from the 60s. But she gets the kids off to school, and then she whispers in his ear one morning, you know, why don't you finish your breakfast and come upstairs, because she's feeling randy, you know. And so he goes upstairs, and there's a sex scene with him and his wife that is just wonderful in so many ways. It's absurd and it's funny and it's genuinely she pulls her breast out of her shirt and puts his hand on it, and with that bouffant hairdo, I mean, it was just like, in 1962, I have it in my mind that all the men were like Ken dolls and all the women were little Barbies, and they were all repressed. And, you know, sure, some of them drank themselves to sleep every night, but this just feels, you know, she feels not like a Barbie doll. She's a woman with needs, right? And he, so the thing bites 2 of his fingers off.
Yeah.
At one point, and our ingenue finds the fingers and puts them, and they manage to reattach the fingers. And he says, it's not, you know, it's not clear if they're going to take or not. And so the rest of the movie, he's got these 2 fingers that
turning black,
darker and darker, until they're just these dead fingers. And oh man, there's a scene in which he pulls them off to intimidate another character. There's race in it, of course, because her co-worker is black. And, you know, and it's Jenkins becomes the kind of, is that his name? Did I just misremember his name?
Richard Jenkins is the actor that is
Eliza's
friend.
Strickland.
Yeah.
Sorry. Strickland is the kind of mouthpiece for everything, the underbelly of this world, like toxic masculinity and, you know, kind of, I don't have a term for this, like casual white supremacy. Like he's not a card carrying member of some KKK or, you know, but it's just baked into his worldview. They talking about God at one point. It's like, you know, he looks like, that's why God looks like me or you, probably a little more like me, you know, and he's not making a joke. It's just the way white America did and probably still views itself, that we are really, this is our country and everyone else is here, and we tolerate you to varying degrees, you know? Yeah. I don't know. It's just chock full of it. And none of that feels leaden or preachy or hit you over the head. It's just in there.
No, it's not heavy handed, but I mean, you know, so this time period was a little over a decade before you and I were born, but we grew up with the, you know, all these old sitcoms were on TV, and people have, especially people who, you know, maybe grew up then, there's a nostalgia for these eras where, like you said, everything seemed perfect. And probably in a lot of ways, it was perfect if you were a straight white male, you know. And Del Toro is showing, you have, is it Octavia Spencer? Is that her name?
Yeah.
You know,
that was also great.
Yeah. So she's black. Richard Jenkins is gay. Sally Hawkins, she can't speak, so she's handicapped. So there are all these people that, and
the other guy's a fish.
Yeah, the other guy's a fish. Yeah. So he has no real power. And although, we find out that he's really powerful, but Richard Jenkins is, or not Richard Jenkins,
Strickland.
Strickland. Yeah, I'm doing it now. He's this person at the top of the food chain. And there's a scene towards the end where, so they've taken, the fish guy, they've gotten him out. And Richard Jenkins so it's a government facility where they have this fish man stored, the asset, they call it. And there's a general that is above Strickland, and he comes in, and he's on his ass and everything. So you get, even as bad as Strickland is, he has somebody that he has to answer to. And so he goes, he's trying to track down where the asset is, and he goes to Octavia Spencer's house, and just immediately comes in and is threatening her. And her husband is sitting in a chair, and he stands up, and Michael Shannon just says, shut up and sit down. And he just sits down, and it's not explicitly spelled out in this, but you got to think, okay, this black man, if he would beat him up or kill him or whatever, I'm sure he, is probably thinking, I can't do anything against this white guy because
in my own home,
because I'll go to prison. They're going to believe that this government, this guy who works for the government in this important job, they're going to believe him over me. I'm sure, that's what, like I say, I'm reading into that, but I'm sure that's what the character probably was thinking. Like, what can I do?
Yeah.
So yeah, Del Toro is saying a lot of really interesting things here without being preachy about it and, beating you over the head with it. But, this is probably, again, somebody like Michael Shannon's character could have gotten away with a lot at this time,
Right. And his character is sort of surprisingly attracted to the lead, not least of which because she can't speak.
Right.
And so he comes on to her more and more overtly throughout the film. And there's that love scene with his wife. He covers her mouth with his rotting hand, and he's bleeding through the bandages, which is right over her mouth. And she's like, honey, he's bleeding. It's like, shh, don't talk. I don't want to be silent. And that's how he achieves climaxes, by fantasizing his wife can't speak, maybe fantasizing that's the other woman. It's just messed up.
Oh yeah. And
but very human, but it feels entirely like this movie there aren't private hidden places from the eye of the camera in this. We see people frankly who they are. I don't know, it's just so well done. And there's a Russian spy too. So it's 1962 Cold War. There are Russian spies, and there's a scientist that works at the facility that's like Bob or whatever, but his real name is, Dmitry. And he cares about this creature, not in the way that she cares. I don't think he's become personally attached, but he realizes that it's intelligent. He's
a scientist.
Spies through a viewing camera that this creature is developing a relationship with this, janitor, this woman who cleans the floor, and that she's signing to him and giving him eggs, and that the two are
playing music for him.
I think it's intelligent, and it can communicate, and they want to dissect it for some, but they're trying to win the space race, and they're trying to learn something about existing in two different, because it can breathe above water for a while or below water, and they're trying to learn something. I mean, they say some justification, but basically they want to cut it open and see what's inside. And
which is exactly what they would do. It's just like
he's trying to stop them. He's like, no, you can't. This is an intelligent. There's so much to learn from this, and killing it just kills it, you know?
Yeah.
But
just
then
like
he's a
Dr.
Russian spy.
Manhattan. It's just like Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen. Naturally, the government would make him into a weapon, instead of using him for good somehow,
Right.
So
all of that's in the stew, and it's a delicious fish stew. At the end, Michael Shannon shows
I
up.
wanted to ask you about the ending. So go ahead.
So she's gonna set him free. She keeps him, the fish guy, they spirit him away from the facility, and she keeps him in her tub for a while. He's not doing well. His scales are coming off. She has a plan to release him. There's a harbor where there's a sort of a lock that fills up with water. And I never understood why you couldn't just dump him over you got to wait till the lock fills up with water. Just set him free. Days and weeks go by until this designated date when there's supposed to be rain and the lock fills up and she can set him free in the lock, rather than just backing the car up and he can swim, dump him in the water. But so all this time, Michael Shannon's trying to figure out, get him back. And it comes to a head in the night. It's pouring rain and they take him out to free him. And Michael Shannon is there, shows up and shoots at everybody, basically. Shoots her, shoots Jenkins too, I think, right? Does he shoot Jenkins?
Yes.
And plugs the fish guy twice in the chest. And it looks like, he killed everybody. But then the fish guy stands up and sort of heals himself, right? And it kills Strickland by sort of swiping just rips his throat out. He's got webs.
He has like sharp kind of talon things.
Yeah, exactly. And Strickland has a line when he heals himself. He's like, "Oh, you are a god," before he dies. And she's more or less dead, it appears. And the fish guy and her get in the water. And all through the film, she has had these 3 scars on either side of her neck that we haven't delved into. Somebody notices them and she's sort of shy about them. And it's been mentioned that she's an orphan. I mean, remember, again, fairy tale here.
Yeah.
So he kind of glows when he's healing or doing what. There's beautiful bioluminescent stripes all over his body, and they open up on her. The
design of him is just fantastic.
It's gorgeous, because it really could have been Creature from the Black Lagoon, but it's definitely evocative of that. It's definitely homage to that. But in the eyes too, he's got multiple lidded eyes, and that actor, for somebody wearing a ton of prosthetics, he can be extremely emotive with his body language and even his face. There's lots of stuff in his face where he's like gazing at her, and I'm like, this dude is basically wearing a Halloween mask. Like, it's not even Batman where you get the lower hat, or Dread where you get from here down. It's just the whole thing is this like prosthetic shield between him and the camera, and he projects. It's great mask work. Anyway, so she turns out that she can breathe underwater. Whether he does that to her, I guess I interpret it like part of that
she has gills.
And can breathe underwater.
Open up so. Did you see that coming at all? Like, did you when we saw the scars? Did you think I noticed, they're going to be gills?
When I noticed them on both sides of her neck, I thought, I wonder if that's where it's going. I wonder if this is a water world type thing. But it never really answers that question, except that she was an orphan, blah blah blah. And you always think, well, maybe if she's a mermaid, maybe the fairy tale part of this is they were made for each other in some way, or not so opposite as it hints. In a fairy tale, Disney fairy tale, there's a curse that turns the guy into a wolf or what, a beast. And it kind of chimes with all of that, like, oh, she really is, they can be together and they're not as different as it first seemed, etc. But it didn't seem like this. It seemed like the fulfillment of prophecy more than, and now by the magic of fish, I make you a fish, right? But there was no indication in dialogue or anything else that she was anything other than human who just couldn't speak.
Right. Yeah. I didn't, and I will admit I'm never great at predicting endings of films or like solving the mystery or anything, because I think I just get kind of wrapped up in the visuals and everything, but I didn't see it coming at all. And it was just like, oh, that's, and I could see maybe people thinking it's a silly, maybe you wouldn't buy into it. I don't know, but
it's a happy
great.
ending.
Mm-hmm.
It's a happy ending, and I think
because you think in the final minutes, you think, oh, they're going, because
it was never going to work. It could have never worked.
Right.
So this is how it always had to end, right?
She signs to him at one point, you, me together. And at the end, he does the sign, you, me together. And she says, no, you have to go. We can't be together. And he is very sad.
Right.
And you think, oh, he's going to jump in the water. And then that's the end. They
Right.
won't be together. But yeah, it's a beautiful, happy ending.
If this potential has always been a part of her, she is unaware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, we don't get the sense that she's like, no, I can't because I left that part of me behind. There's none of that. And her legs don't turn into a tail. I said the term mermaid. If that's my term, that never really comes up anywhere in the film. And none of that is the point.
Right.
None of that is the point. The point is that you get this kind of fairy tale happy ending, despite all expectation and prediction of everybody, including our ingenue. She's Cinderella. I dream of being a queen, but I don't think it's possible that it will happen. And then she dreams of being able to be with this being that she has fallen in love with and feels so whatever. And at the end, they do get to be together. So I think a happy ending like that, a fairy tale happy ending, is kind of hard to pull off in a movie that takes itself seriously, because it's such a pure fantasy. In most movies, you get the happy ending, and that's just where we stop telling the story, because that's how life is there's these ups and downs. So you stop on a high point. You're like, oh, see, it all worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in a fairy tale, you can just leave it. Like, there's not going to be a chapter 2 of this. This is just the story of the Richard Jenkins voiceover. Is like the princess, he calls it, right? The princess without voice.
Yeah.
So, I mean, right from the beginning, it's setting this up as like, this is a fairy tale, but nobody uses that term.
Right.
Everything is shown and meaning is suggested, and then you're left to draw from it what you will. But it wasn't one of those movies that I left scratching my head. There were questions that I had that weren't answered, but not like logical things that I got hung up on. Like, if they could do that, then why didn't they just do except for the water, right? So I'm like, yeah. I mean, there was no other way that you could have gotten this thing into the ocean.
Yeah.
Well, she also wanted to keep it around. She didn't want to send him away.
Yeah, I'm sure. She was. I'm sure regretful. Not regretful isn't the right word, but she wasn't looking forward to that. Because they're leading up to that date that it's going to rain and it's going to lift. Raise the water up, and I'm sure she didn't want that time to come. But then it all works out.
Yeah, I also don't see a lot of magical realism, like this literal an example of magical realism in film, where it's more or less telling you a quote unquote real story set in a quote unquote real setting, but truly magical and fantastical things happen. At one point, she stops up. She turns on the water in the bathroom, and she shuts the door and she stuffs towels under the bottom of the door. And what happens in the film is the room fills up with water so that she and he can be together completely submerged in water, because he's just been in this tub the whole time.
Right.
and it is leaking, and there's the theater sort of raining in the theater downstairs, and it's just all these kind of well, of course that wouldn't be possible. That's not how a room would behave if you tried to do it with water. But it seems totally plausible in the movie, and that, I guess that's what I mean by magical realism, is you just so beautiful that literalism kind of becomes poetry. And then it just steps across, so dances sort of across that line and back so much throughout. I mean, the very idea of a fish man
is ridiculous. Everybody
just sort of accepts. I'm like, well, how would they process this? Oh, we call it the asset, and we take it to a secret facility, right? So like, this is a creature. You can't kill this. Like, you have to study what this is. This is huge. The scientist plays that to the T. He's like, what's the matter with you people? Don't you see what we have here? This is insane. And it was like, we're going to cut it open, see what makes it tick.
And it's the only one that they know of. There doesn't seem to be another one of these creatures. But yeah, that magical realism is, and it's great that other than the scene that we talked about briefly, where there's the little dance number, that's the only part of the movie that is kind of in her imagination. But everything else, as it's presented to us, actually happens. There's none of it and I love that you have that mixture of, what could actually happen, and then this fish guy that couldn't actually happen. So we, in a pretty short time frame, we watched 3 Del Toro movies. We watched Crimson Peak and then Nightmare Alley and this one. Could you say that there's one that was your favorite? Or, I mean, they're all very different, but, and this one has a happy ending, whereas Del Toro doesn't necessarily, Nightmare Alley is a very not happy ending.
Right.
And Crimson Peak is not a happy ending either, both pretty dark endings.
I think Crimson Peak would take third place for me of those 3
I think
movies.
so too, even though I love Crimson Peak. But yeah, I would say it's not quite as good as this or Nightmare Alley.
And Nightmare Alley and this are just such different films. I feel like, and Nightmare Alley's a remake. Not that that's disparaging or should be disparaging in any way. I think that this one, as a fairy tale, probably edges it out for me, just because it's such a perfect kind of a bonbon. It's like a Christmas present of a movie. It's so self-contained, and it brings sort of, I mean, it doesn't bring itself full circle, but it just sort of completes itself. It's this little snow globe of this gorgeous thing. I loved Nightmare Alley.
I did too.
And the thought occurred to me as I was watching that movie, the term masterpiece occurred to me. I'm like, this is a masterpiece. It's so masterfully done. And that didn't occur to me in The Shape of Water, perhaps because I had just seen the other one. But I don't know. Tom Stoppard is a playwright that I like a lot and has written many plays, and I've been in a few of them. And he wrote a play called Arcadia that is not, I don't think he himself would consider his greatest work, but it is this sort of perfect thing. It's this kind of snow globe. It's gorgeous and rich and multi-layered, but it all kind of comes around full circle. And he said that is the one that came out of him the most easily. Like, when writing it, that one just sort of fell out of his pen into this perfect creation. And that's how I feel about The Shape of Water. It just feels like he had this in his mind and he just put it on film. And it's just one of those things that come to you almost fully formed, and you're like, I'm not going to change a thing. That's exactly how it should be. So
there's no fat in this film. Like, what would you cut out of this film?
No, there's not. I mean, it trips right along, and it's
2 hours.
It's It's not an hour, 20 minutes. It's a 2-hour film, but again, you're hooked. Like once it gets you, you are just on for the ride. So I mean, I don't know. I suppose if I had to watch one of them again tonight, I'd probably watch The Shape of Water.
I
But
would too. That's what I was going to say.
but it was close because Nightmare Alley was so great.
I loved Nightmare Alley, but The Shape of Water is definitely a film that I think I would revisit more often than Nightmare Alley.
I think I'd see things I missed in both.
Right.
But I think I'd see more that I missed in The Shape of Water because, like you say, there's no fat. Nothing's arbitrary in those big, elaborate sets he creates. It's not accidental.
Del Toro is just, and I mean, I've said this on the show, several times, but he's just a master filmmaker. And I don't know if I said this before, but he was attached to a Justice League Dark film that was in development for a while. And he's a bit like Quentin Tarantino, where he talks a lot about projects that he's working on or did work on or wants to do. And it's all, there are all these things that, he's probably never going to get to do all the things that he wants to do, but he's tried several times to do a In the Mountains of Madness, H.P. Lovecraft movie, which is never
that's tough material.
Yeah. But the Justice League Dark movie was going to have it wouldn't be Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. It's going to be Constantine and Swamp Thing. And I just think if I were a movie, if I were executives at Disney or Marvel or DC or whatever, I would just back a truck up to his house and just be like, okay, what character do you want? What's the budget? Do whatever you want, because he could. On the other hand, I'm perfectly happy with him just continuing to do his own thing. These movies that he writes and directs, that are, well, Nightmare Alley was a remake, but you get what I'm saying. But,
yeah.
So I mean, the guy's he's definitely one of the best filmmakers working right now, and I'm interested in anything he's going to do.
He and Denis Villeneuve.
That's right. Our two favorites. So
two current favorites.
Let's do our ratings real quick. And then I had a listener question about Nightmare Alley that I wanted to ask you about real quick. So
would you recommend it?
I would recommend it wholeheartedly.
Me too. Have you been listening to the
podcast? yeah, exactly. I mean, this was definitely, I felt that year deserving of Best Picture. I felt like that was the best movie that I saw in 2017. So yeah, if you haven't seen The Shape of Water, just watch it. It's just a beautiful.
Yeah.
This is for people who love movies. This is just, it's again, not hitting you over the head with it, but she lives above a movie theater, and there's a scene where the fish man gets out and is watching, what is he watching, Cleopatra or something like that in the movie theater.
Yeah.
So, he's a guy who loves movies, and I just think this is just for people who love movies.
It's a love letter. It's a love letter to cinema. I agree with you 100%. I think if you have kids that are mature enough to handle, there isn't a ton of overt violence in it, but when it's violent, it's pretty graphic. Yeah, and the psychological violence is upsetting. Mm-hmm. Like Michael Shannon is genuinely scary, and the sexuality, like I say, is frank. There's some nudity that is not in and of itself a big deal to me. No. But the nudity in this film feels so sexually charged in a true way. Like it's not, it doesn't feel gratuitous or salacious. It just feels like she gets up in the morning and she has this little routine, involves taking a bath, and she masturbates in the bath. And we see that this is her routine. She puts one foot clunk up on the side of the thing and throws her head back. And I just remember being like, not clutching my pearls, but being like, oh my, and it's just, I guess for lack of a better way of saying it, it's very European in that way. It doesn't seem to have American, the American hangups with sex are part of the world in which the film is set. It's not part of the filmmaker's sensibility of displaying this world, and that there's kind of that contrast there. There's kind of that, this is the sort of American repression and the ways in which that lives in the bedroom, and then this is the sort of like, well, when nobody's looking, here's how we are with our own bodies, or when we're with somebody that we love, even if that person is a fish, here's how we are with our own bodies. And it was enormously refreshing. But I wouldn't watch this movie with my kids, who are 13 and 11. And maybe I'm just a prude, but I would wait until they're a little bit.
I'd say 13 and 11 would be a little young, you know.
I'd wait until they were a little, I don't think they'd get it. I don't think they'd appreciate.
Yeah,
that's part of it. I don't think they'd be scarred, or they would, you know what I mean? Like, I don't. So I say fairy tale, and I say it's beautiful, and some people are like, my kids can take it. That's fine. Mine probably aren't quite there. Maybe I'm the one with hangups. But
and on the other end of the spectrum, this is a movie, and I was thinking this as I was watching it, that I think my parents maybe would like. They would either think it was really good, or they would just be like, that was weird. But they would be bothered by the sexuality, and some of the violence would be a little too brutal for them as well.
Yeah, my mom wouldn't like the violence.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a great film.
That's part of Del Toro's universe too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's very much part of
He's
the
showing
world.
A lot of aspects of what life is like. So the Nightmare Alley question that I had. So a friend of mine, Eugene, who listens to the show, and he's not American, and he had watched the new Nightmare Alley and loved it, and then he also watched the original, which I have not seen before. And I said, what did you think? And he said, well, I liked it, but I didn't like it as well as the new one. And he was saying, and I agreed with him, he said, I have some trouble with watching, because I think it's 1947 when it came out. And he said, those movies seem weird to me. He said, I have a little bit of trouble connecting with them. And I said, well, I do too. And he said, it's the strange way of speaking. And I told him that, and since you studied acting, I wanted to ask you about this. So I said, well, there's something called the transatlantic accent, or there's another term that they use for it that I'm drawing a blank on. But I said, so when you watch those 30s and 40s movies, everybody sounds kind of vague. They're American, but they're vaguely British. And I said, that was a manufactured accent for acting. And also, it was kind of like posh schools, and in the Northeast.
You can go to finishing school to learn to talk that way, to lose your regional accent and talk like a refined person.
Right. And I said, eventually, somewhere around the 60s, I said that kind of fell out of fashion. And I said, for me, the kind of the 60s is the beginning of modern filmmaking, I think. And he said, when did Planet of the Apes come out? And I said, 1968. And he said, well, Charlton Heston he sounds like a person today. And I said, yeah. And I said, I think, again, I'm not a film scholar or anything, but I said, for whatever reason, that transatlantic accent kind of went away. And then the 60s, you got into this kind of more naturalistic acting, and we've been there ever since. Nobody uses the transatlantic accent. But was that something when, is that even like in theater? Is that still taught today or anything, or is it just completely dead? Do you know?
That's a good question that I don't know that I can answer. It's a thing. When I was in acting school, we studied a thing called the IPA, which is the International Phonetic Alphabet. And so if you had to play a character who was Irish, you could look up what particular region or area of Ireland, like if it's Northern Ireland, Belfast, this is documented where there's sort of, it's an alphabet of sounds, of phonetic sounds. So if the line is, you're strange, you said you'd be here at 8, but you're always late, and you were trying to sound like me, you would write that out in your script using IPA above the lines, so that your would be like yeah, and then you're strange, and right. And then, but for if you were doing Belfast, it would be something more closer to like, you're strange. You said you'd be here at 8, but you're always late. And so you'd use different, and that way it was a way of being consistent with, in other words, you'd learn to say it the way you'd written it in. And that's how you would sound convincing. And you could do that for that I forget, is it transatlantic or mid-Atlantic or something?
Mid-Atlantic. Those are kind of used interchangeably, transatlantic and mid-Atlantic.
And I've seen productions of like earlier theater classics where they decided we want everybody to speak in this accent, right? We want everybody to use this mid-Atlantic standard. But it's not, like you say, it's not from anywhere. It's not like, oh, that's how people talk in Washington, D.C. It's just it was a movie construct to make everyone sound refined and slightly British. And I don't know the origins of it, but I don't think
it was actually, I watched a couple of YouTube videos about it and I don't recall but there was some theater director who created it. Essentially.
That's interesting.
So yeah, it was just like I say, it was just manufactured. It wasn't like other accents that just happen organically, and it was around for however many decades and then it went out of fashion. But you think of like Katharine Hepburn, or even you watch like political figures from that time, because like you said, they would have gone to a finishing school or whatever, like FDR, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, and I didn't even do it right with the you drop the R.
No, but if you see those old black and white Hollywood movies, you're seeing it, right? I mean, that's, everybody is talking in some version of that. And of course, Katharine Hepburn did, but Katharine Hepburn also had a really distinctive voice, that became part of her thing. But as a
like
young
Cary Grant,
exactly, my darling, I'm sure you. There's sort of that was kind of he was even more of a palate, was sort of stiff. But it is really interesting, and I think that in the 60s, naturalism became something that's like, I think an Easy Rider, which is
exactly
boring ass movie if you ask me now, but it was all about breaking
the ending is great, but
it's all about breaking the forms of what it's just like, no man, it's the 60s and we're gonna be real. I don't know, that's my.
But that definitely for me, and I know for me, this is as somebody who really loves movies, I guess this is kind of a blind spot or whatever for me. There are certainly, I love Alfred Hitchcock, so there are films, black and white films, and It's a Wonderful Life and things like that. But there are a lot of films from that era that I'm sure are great, but I just have in kind of pre-60s, I have a really hard time connecting with films. There's a lot of stuff from the 60s and beyond that I love, but
I hear you. I don't watch a bunch of the old movies, but I love, like, the Maltese Falcon. I mean, there's classics that are just great movies that the style doesn't get in the way of me getting really into the movie.
And I would love to watch the original Nightmare Alley, and there are some, I like noir. So there are definitely some of those noir films from the 30s, 40s, 50s that I would like to watch sometime, but there's just so much stuff to watch as well. I love neo-noir.
Yeah Film is great.
Yep. So we already know what we're going to watch next week.
Time Bandits. So Chris talk movies at gmail.com. If you are watching us on YouTube, you're seeing our face. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you for listening. Continuing to listen, perhaps. We are available. We're on the socials. You can send us a suggestion or your questions. We are going to be doing Time Bandits for next week, which is a film I remember from my youth. Haven't seen in a long, long time, but I'm excited. And I think we even have a ghost of an idea for what's after that, but we can talk about that when we get there.
Sure.
Okay. So Thank you for joining us. Do you have anything else to add, Chris?
Nope. I think we
got it.
I think we covered it all.
Excellent. Then we will talk to you next week.